It's a beautiful sunny day and we're outside the National Motorcycle Museum at Bickenhill, which is just outside Birmingham. Today we're going to have a look at Triumphs and the beginnings of Triumphs in this museum, which in fact is a microcosm of the British motorcycle industry. But we haven't got time to look at the whole industry, we have got time to look at Triumphs, and I'll take you on a little time trip, and we'll start off with the very first Triumph in 1902. The original Triumph name goes back to 1884. When a young German, Siegfried Bettmann, founded the Triumph Company in London. In those days he was specialising in import and export of virtually anything and everything. But he recognised that there was a start of a craze in bicycles, and in 1889 he made his first bicycle. But in 1902 he made his first motorcycle, and this is it. If you're old enough, you can recognise the front brake here as being the centre pull type with rod operated from the handlebars pulling up on the rim. The rear brake is a hub-operated brake, a back-pedalling one. You just pedal backwards or held it backwards, and that has slowly slowed the back wheel down with a little bit of luck. Another bicycle part, or parts, are the pedals. You could actually propel yourself along with the pedals, even though it's a heavy old bicycle, but you also use them to start the machine in the first place. And here's something that you don't get on modern machines of any description. This little gadget here, you actually poured neat petrol in this little top. Just look at that, all nickel plated. Neat fuel in there, close the top, opened it up, and you got a neat dose of fuel straight on top of the piston. Then away you went, pedalling like mad. There was a minor explosion inside, and if you got it all right, the thing could actually burst into life, and off you'd go. Just look at these controls as well. For the little carburettor here, nickel plated linkage. And look at these little levers. They've got ratchets on the back. Didn't have a twist grip or any lever on the bars. You just had to take your hand off the bars. Listen to that. Adjust that. You could probably count the number of clicks and decide whether you wanted to do 3 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour. 30 miles an hour would be very adventurous, I reckon. Equally on the other side, this little lever, this controls not only a decompressor on the exhaust valve, but also the ignition timing. And wherever you see it, nickel-plated fittings here, there and everywhere. Now there was no automatic oil feed in these days, but what you did have was an oil tank in here and then this little plunger pump. And you'd actually open the valve and pump up the oil pressure. And you'd have to do that regularly or woe betide you. You'd have the engine seizing up. So there was a manual input, something else to think of at the time. Now coming round to the lights, these are pre-oxyacetylene lights. These are actually oil lamps from the carriage days, would you believe? And so you have to make sure you kept your wick well trimmed. Now Huey, here's the bike that started it all, 1937 Speed Twin, the very first prototype as I understand it.
Yes, the registration looks familiar, CWK41. I think I remember seeing that very bike going down the production line at the Dale Street Works. Rumour has it that Edward Turner used to ride it, but I'm not so sure about that.
But it makes a nice story anyway.
It does, it makes a nice story, and of course, who can disprove it now?
Because the thing is, with this one, being the first one, you owe your current occupation to this, the Speed Twin, don't you? Without it, there wouldn't have been the Bonnevilles, the Tiger 100s and all the rest of it. And so, and I think we can all recognise within that engine is the components that were carried right through to the end.
It all started here.
And so the big difference with this one, all-iron engine?
Yes, this is one of the early 6-stud motors as well. Later on, when we found that the cylinder base nuts were cracking and coming off at this point on the outside of the crankcase, it was decided that the cylinder barrel ought to be held on by another 2 additional 3/8 nuts and studs to keep it more secure. There were failures where actual crankcases broke and allowed the barrel to float up and down with the pistons, much to the concern of the rider.
So production models, did they immediately start with the increased flange and
No, there were quite a few that were in this format with the six stud fitting, which is what they were called. These are very, very sought after. There aren't many about at all. I think the natural progression was for people when they had these, if they wanted to use them for clubman's racing back in the pre-war days, they took this crankcase out and threw it over the hedge and fitted the later 1938 8-stud crankcase.
So we better go looking in a few hedges then, do you think?
Yes.
I'm now joined at the National Motorcycle Museum by Colin Wall, who's the restoration manager for the museum. And behind me here is a Triumph 1923. Colin, this is basically a Model H used in the First World War, is it?
Well, it was developed from the Model H. It was actually, this was when Triumphs were trying to get a more sporting image. And they located the help of a very famous man at the time, Sir Henry Ricardo, that's correct. And he tuned the engine and converted it to an overhead valve, and this sports a 4-valve head, which was very new for the time.
Yeah, unheard of really, wasn't it?
Of course,
yeah.
Yes. And his name was actually put to it, and so this was known as the Triumph Ricardo, and had a famous nickname as the Triumph Ricky.
Right. So would that have been like the sort of Bonneville of its time then?
It would have been the Bonneville of the mid-20s, yes.
Yeah. Something for all the lads to
yes,
have. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Something else with this that was very new for its time, it actually had electric lighting.
Yes, yes. The electric lighting would have only been introduced maybe 2 years earlier in this machine. And for a machine to support electric lighting would cost quite a fair amount of money as compared to the acetylene lighting. This one has got the very ornate dynamo, very expensive unit for the day, and with a battery fitted at the rear.